So this Legacy 500 program's been going before COVID. I think the fall of 2018 maybe was the first one with Paul Zaire. And we're on the home stretch. 1525 to 2025 is 500 years. And I think, if I recall right, and maybe in one of the first programs, we were reminded that if we don't know our own history, we don't know anything, which is kind of an absolute statement. It's like being a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. And so I'm reminded of that fairly often. We often refer to the Anabaptists of the 16th century as the radical wing of the Reformation. Radical comes from a Latin word meaning root, or forming at the root. The Anabaptists look back more than 1,000 years to the Christian and apostolic churches before Constantine as their roots. They came to see the life and teaching of Jesus as the interpretive center of the Bible and attempted to understand the Bible in a straightforward way. Jesus meant what he said and was talking to us, is a quote from Lynn Miller, who spoke here a couple of years ago. And that puts it in a pretty understandable way. Well, this got them in serious trouble in matters of adult baptism, refusing oaths of allegiance, loving enemies, etc. The stuff we often refer to as discipleship or following the way of Jesus. Has anybody here had any DNA testing? No? Sure, somebody has. My daughter has her dogs tested. And she also, well, they're shelter dogs, and so she wants to know something. Anyway, I've been tested. I'm 3% Portuguese, according to the thing. I don't know where that comes from. We like to play the Mennonite game in some of our circles, and most of us in this community are related in several different directions to each other. Anyway, in the natural world, we are what we are, and science attempts to define that. Whether it's all right or wrong, we don't know. When we get our DNA test back, we might have some questions. Spiritual DNA is a different story. And we're something like perennials growing up from deep, unseen, and living roots. But we're also like annuals, springing up with new vision from seeds scattered by the Spirit. And we're also outsiders that are grafted in to the people of God. So we're all those things at the same time in a certain kind of way, I think. There's an old saying, show me the boy at 7 and I'll show you the man. In this program, we've asked our panelists to reflect on personal stories that were and are significant to their faith and formation. And we have a time limit, so first we'd like to go around and ask them to talk about their younger years a bit and their formation in their congregations or their growing up years. And then secondly, as adults, how you've lived out those things that were implanted in you as a younger person. And some of this may we're not exactly sure what, this was Sam's vision to have this type of program. We're not exactly sure what all of that was. He was gone on vacation, and then when he came back, he wasn't here for the next meeting when we got together because he had passed. Or it might have been just before he passed. So, the part of what he might have wanted to do was to talk about the beginnings of various congregations in the area. So you might hear a bit of that sprinkled in here. And then at the end, we'd like to have time for questions. So, Evan, if you want to start, and I'm going to limit your time to like about 7 minutes, or we're not going to make it. So I'll try to give you a heads up when there's about a minute left, okay? So, go ahead. And then we'll work right down the line. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, introduce yourself and your congregation, please.
Evan's there. I spent most of my life at the Lava Mennonite Church. Can you hear? Is this on? Okay. Just a few impressions that I had. First of all, one thing that impressed me was that the whole family attended church. Parents didn't come and drop the kids off and then run off for breakfast or something like that. The whole family came. And the interesting thing is that the fathers brought the family, and in some churches that's pretty unusual. But I remember a Sunday school class for each age group of the family, and everybody participated in that because it was important to study the Bible and to share with one another. That's one thing that impressed me. Second thing, when I was young, we used to gather around the furnace down cellar, we called it, and sing furnace songs. The interesting thing, as I think back of those songs, they were songs like Follow the Path of Jesus, Yield Not to Temptation, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Dare to Be a Daniel. Those are a few I picked out. I want to talk about them a little bit later. When I was in 6th grade, attended summer Bible school. I had attended summer Bible school all the way up through. Don over here was my teacher. Don't remember a lot you said, Don. But in that class, the title of those lessons were The Teachings of Jesus. And in one of those lessons, it talked about the narrow and the broad way. I can still see the picture in the book of a cross, this narrow road going through the cross and up through some mountains. It was crooked, it was narrow, and there weren't a lot of people on that road. And then in the front was a wider road that kind of went downhill, and there were a lot of people there. And at the end of each of those roads, it had these words, life and destruction. Maybe it's things Don said, I don't know, but in that context, I realized I had to make a choice. And I had to determine which of those roads I wanted to walk on and live on. And I decided that I wanted the end result of life, not destruction. I also realized it was probably going to be tough. It looked like a narrow, difficult road. The other road looked easier. And it would probably be a little lonely because there weren't as many people on it. So if I chose that direction, I probably wouldn't be fitting in with everybody else. And it might be difficult. I look back at those songs I learned at the furnace. What a friend we have in Jesus. This road went through the cross to get onto it. Follow the path of Jesus. Yield not to temptation, a temptation to go to the easy route and all that type of thing. And also dare to be a Daniel. Stand up for, what's it say, purpose firm, heeding God's commands and all that type of thing. Those were a couple things that were impressive to me. Summer Bible school was an integral part of my life. And as I look back at I'm biased, I think that was the best Bible school curriculum anybody could have. If you like the present stuff, that's fine. I like that one back there. Part of it, initially as children, we were taught God loves you. God cares about you, and God cares about other people too. And for instance, just an example of that. How many of you remember the Wang Fu thing? The little Wang Fu of China. Yeah. Here's what it said, one part of it. This is the Bible, the best book of all. Wang Fu can't read it, he's too small. But he'll soon grow big if he eats the rice that smells so good and tastes so nice. Cooked by his mother, so kind and good, who lives in a house of bamboo wood with little Wang Fu of China. And I thought that was a Bible story, but I guess it wasn't. But the interesting thing is, just made some notes here. That story told children that there's other people around the world who are also people that God cares about. It's not just about me. And some of them live differently from what we do. Little Wang Fu, he ate rice most of the time. Well, most of us, I didn't grow up on rice. I grew up on meat and potatoes. He lived in a house of bamboo. You know, that wasn't quite what I did either. But he also had the Bible. And he had a mother, and he had a family. And somehow we learned that, yes, there's people who are different from us, but we have an awful lot in common. And God cares about all of us. I think it's a tremendous education for a preschooler. I think that was first kindergarten, that happened. Third grade, we learned the New Testament books. Fourth grade, we learned the Old Testament books. How do you find something in the Bible if you don't know the books? I guess you go to the table of contents and try to find it that way. But that was extremely important. Fifth grade, the life of Jesus. Sixth grade, the teachings of Jesus. Seventh grade, the followers of Jesus. Eighth grade, the life of Paul, one of the greatest missionaries who went to the Gentiles. That's us. What? Oh, Lordy. Okay. But I think it was a tremendous, that messed me up. Anyway, thinking about studying the life of Jesus, who Jesus is and so on. And then what did he say? What did he teach? The teachings of Jesus. And then looking at people who were his disciples and followers and learning from them. And then certainly Paul. And hey, Paul's the one that went to Europe to got the gospel to our ancestors and so on. So I'm done. Is that it?
I can't believe you remember what the theme of every year was.
I remember.
How long ago was that?
She remembers.
Well, the later one. Okay, I'm Geneva Berkler. This is my church. And that's a hard act to follow. Very hard act to follow. Okay, this church started in 1941. It left the Krogan Church over a matter of dress. I was born in 1940. There's my age. So this is where I have always been to church. I remember coming here with my family, 7 of us. Remember coming on Sunday nights because there were Sunday night meetings. And it was always exciting to come with Dad on Sunday nights because we couldn't all come because we could stop at Hiltz's store for ice cream after church. Maybe that's, yes, absolutely. Memories of my small earlier years here in church. One thing in this corner, which wasn't there anymore, was a library. Charlotte Zare was a librarian. It was in a glass case. It was so neat to go in there to pick out a book, because I like to read. Just, that was one thing. Summer Bible School, which started here, I believe, in 1945. I think it was one of the first ones around here. 2 weeks of summer Bible school in the morning. My dad, we would go as far as Natural Bridge to pick up kids to come. There were tons of kids coming here to Bible school at that time. Those are smaller stories. I was baptized here, left for Goshen College, studied there for 1 year. My Mennonite professor was J.C. Winger. I've forgotten a lot of that, but a lot of that Mennonite history has stayed with me. Interested, and I'm still thinking that That's what my life is about. Serving others, doing things for others who are less fortunate, learning, and so actually right now my life is still being busy in the church, working with Mennonite Central Committee, all of the many ministries that it has. My husband and I worked with Mennonite Disaster Service, saw people that just needed help no matter where they are. There is so much of that in this world, even right here in our community. You never know when you walk out of church on Sunday morning who you're going to meet. You could smile to someone, do something good for someone. I can't believe that anybody could be bored when there is so much to do for other people. This struck me this week, and I wrote it down today. The Pope died, a couple weeks ago, and a statement that he said, "We cannot be indifferent to the world around us." That struck me because we're only a small part of a greater world, and that's where I want to do my service.
Thank you, Geneva, for giving me extra time. I'm just going to start out a bit with my younger years and then move on. I think some of the other things I have to share are more important. I'm very grateful for my folks, and that as a family, as children, we were taken to church from the day we were born. For the legacy, for the things that were important to my folks, aunts, uncles, the Krogan Church, for the number of years that we went there. It was very formative in my life, with Bible school, Sunday school, Sunday evening services, prayer meeting on Wednesday evening, etc. When I was 16, it was actually when the Numberg Church was purchased, and my father was a trustee, and actually I was 17, and we worked at the church in Numberg, and then it was the first service was the first Sunday in March of 1964. What was impressive there was years that I taught Sunday school, and also was involved in the singing ministry there. I graduated from high school when I was 17, and my goal was to be a dairy farmer. I really enjoyed dairy farming. I really thought that was my life. When I turned 18, the government gave me a CO1 so I could stay home and farm it with my dad. Elmer and Eileen Lehman were here in October of 1967, and I felt God calling me to go to Costa Rica. It was a real struggle. I just could not. I didn't think God knew what He was doing. In February of 1968, I went to Rosedale Bible School. It was just a school then for a month in preparation for going to Costa Rica, and I actually left in July of 1968 to go to Costa Rica. It changed my life. My vision for what I thought God wanted me to do, and also for the people that I didn't know at the time would be such an impact on my life. In 1969, when I was in Costa Rica, I felt God calling me to the Hispanic ministry. I didn't know where, I didn't know when, and I didn't know how. Praise God for what happened. The first Hispanics arrived in Lewis County to work on dairy farms in March of 2002. Nathan Olmsted was actually the one that started the Hispanic ministry in August of 2007. He had been in Ecuador for 3 years, and when he came home, he felt the call to start a ministry for the Hispanics that were in the area working at the time, and he actually started that in August of 2007. There was one person that came to the service. It was in house number 9 at Mark's Farms. I wasn't involved in the ministry until November of the same year, and I've been involved in it ever since. Nathan and Denise named the church Iglesia Hispana Luz y Vida, Spanish Church of Light and Life. When they were pastors of the church, they actually left the church in April of 2017, started the ministry in Utica, where they presently reside. I was overseer to the Hispanic church until I was ordained in January of 2019. It's been a blessing, it's been a struggle, but I just can't thank God enough for his presence in my life, in the life of the Hispanics, of those that have come, accepted Christ, been baptized, and have seen a different life from what they were born and brought up with, and also the challenge that we always have because so many of them come from a Catholic background. Today we also have some people that are here from and were born and brought up in Christian families in Guatemala and also in Mexico, and what a blessing, what an addition to the church. Currently, we have between 25 and 35 people that normally come to our services. We have many spiritual gifts that God has given to people that we can use in our church services, and it's just a blessing to be a part of their lives. The one thing that's really difficult is when there is a death in the family, whether it be a grandpa, grandma, mom, dad, cousin, brother, sister, whatever, they cannot go home for the funeral. They do have things they have to deal with that are very difficult. Linda and I have really been blessed by the Hispanics. We bought the church. Actually, I made a handshake with Michael Wine, who was a representative from the Christolite Mennonite Church on the 15th of March in 2018. And we purchased the church, and we actually had our first service on the 15th of August of 2018. Later, you may have some questions you want to ask me. But it's been, I never dreamed when I felt that call from God in 1969 that it would become to what it is today, and how I would be able to reach out and help so many people, not only those that come to church, but also the many Hispanics that live and work in the area that need someone that can translate for them, can give them rides, whatever. We are blessed in a way that I never dreamed would ever happen in my life, and I thank God for his presence. I thank God for his faithfulness to his people, and I pray that we'll be faithful to the end.
Thank you, Larry. In Hebrews 11:27, the Bible says that Moses persevered because he saw him who was invisible. And starting with a young lady teaching public school at the Otter Creek Elementary School, and her being concerned with her students' lack of biblical knowledge of any kind, to a Bible school using the closed Methodist church in Otter Creek for the first year for Bible school. The next year in the old, what we call the old Pine Grove Church, to regular Sunday services. So I guess, and we are indebted to those early people at Pine Grove for helping us to understand what missional outreach in our area is to be. Growing up around them and seeing their dedication, I again say they persevered because they saw him who was invisible. And it was difficult. A lot of the early stuff, it was difficult there. The difficulties were always present. The Bible school tents were set up for classes. There was 2 single tents and 1 double tent. And I always felt, even when I was a student there, I always felt sorry for those poor teachers, ladies teaching in those tents. It got hot in there in the summer, all morning from 10 o'clock till 11:30, quarter of 12 before they dismissed. But they kept those kids' attention, and those children weren't used to being in a closed environment like that. And so it was a difficult thing for them. Hence, the children had to be picked up, and sometimes 14 to 15 in one car, before seatbelt law, obviously. But it probably shouldn't have been done. But my brother had a pickup truck, and he'd fill the front seat up, and he put made two benches to set on each side in the back, and he'd open up the tailgate. He had a cap on the truck, but he'd open up the tailgate, the kids would jump in, he'd close the tailgate, head to the next group. And he'd have the back of the truck full by the time he got to church. I think we did count one time. I think I had 15 or 16 in the car once. The big ones sat on the seat, and the little ones sat on their laps. That's how we got that many in. And also the church. One year we had around a little over 100 students there in a building designed for probably 50, 60, somewhere in that area. And occasionally a bat would decide to come out of the top of the corner of the church and fly around the church. I'd emptied the end of the service one Sunday, or one Bible school meeting. Winter, my folks were asked early to attend Pine Grove to help out there. So it's the only church I ever remember growing up in. And we would leave early from home, and we would stay in the car, and Dad would go in and start fire in the church, trying to get it warmed up so we could have services. And after it got warmed up some, then he'd have us come out and get us. Once in a while, the lady next door would see us sitting in the car, and she'd have us come over and stay in her warm kitchen until it was warm enough in church to get us in. And we liked to stand around the stove. And when we got to church, and Dad, he said, "You guys got good coats. You go sit down in the chairs." He said, "Let some of the kids that come from the area here that don't have coats as good as yours to get warmed up by the fire." So, and after church, I remember very clearly seeing Emma Mosier sweeping the snow out of the entrance in the back of the church, because the snow didn't melt during the service that the kids had dragged in when they come in with their boots and stuff. And she'd be out there sweeping the snow out the door when we left. In the spring, I remember the water we had a basement there, classes down there. In the spring, a few times, the water was up to the doorknob in the basement door. The pump must have quit during the week or something, and filled it. And so somebody, me or somebody, would take their shoes and socks off, roll their pants up, and head over to the pump, get that going, so that by the time Sunday school was raised, sometimes it'd be down low enough that we could still use it. There's many positive things also that happened there. New last names became common. Nobody left Bible school without a Bible. And a couple weeks ago, I have a lady that's in her mid-70s coming to Living Hope now, which was the old Pine, now Living Hope. And she said, "I still have the Bible that I was given in Bible school." She told me that. Milford Schwarzenchuber, Nelson's brother, taught Sunday school class for young guys in his car. That was his classroom. There wasn't room in the church, so they all went out in his car. And at this point, there are 4 or 5 men now serving in ministry in this area that had him as a teacher sometime in their growing up years. So he was pretty effective in what he did. Also, the Bible school, Dad and Mosier, Andrew Mosier, thank you, Evan, where each year they would trade. 1 year Dad would be superintendent and Andrew would be assistant superintendent. Next year Andrew would be superintendent and Dad would be assistant. So they would work back and forth, and before Bible school, the two of them would go canvassing for 2 or 3 days. Mom would pack his lunch, and they'd meet at our place, and one would drive one day, and one in canvass the area, line up children to go to Bible school. And I still remember 1 year in the spring, my dad had fell off a barn roof and broke both of his bones and both of his wrists, and he had casts on. And he told Andrew, he said, "Boy, Andrew, I just can't really help with Sunday or Bible school this year." He said, "I've got to be home. I can't work very well, and I got to be home and get my haying in. And Andrew said, Vernon, he said, you come and help at Bible school, and we'll see to it that your hay gets in. And he sent his 2 boys, Ellis and Elton, over, and in the afternoons for 2 or 3 days to help us get our hay in. So that's the kind of people that I grew up around. Those were dedicated to that kind of thing.
You're down to about a minute then.
I'm down just about. The first Sunday of the month also, when we went to Pine Grove, our mom would pack a lunch, and other ladies would too, the first Sunday of every month, and then we would go to Bender's nursing home after lunch to have a program there. And as kids, I don't know if we liked it or not, but we did it. We had to do it, and I guess it became indwelled in me because we just kept doing it when Ruth made our lunches, and we just stay over and go up for a program at Bender's. I heard a quote the other day. It said, the nature of the spiritual life is that we are certain in our uncertainty. So we often are uncertain of the next step, but we are certain of the God who will be leading those steps. So thank you.
I'm glad you took extra time because I'm going to be shorter. I'm Ed Barogi from the Carthage congregation. Growing up, one of the things I recall was when the first Bible school started in our area. I was just a little. My mom said I was too young, but I thought I wanted to go, and I remember how I felt so left out. So the second day of Bible school, Mom checked there's some people picking us up in our neighborhood. Mom checked to see if I could go, and they said, sure, go ahead. So I got in on the Bible school that year. One of the things that I remember growing up is Sunday school. I remember Esther Yancey, who I thought was the most kind person I'd ever known. She just somehow, she conveyed a kindness and a love to me as a little child that I thought was exceptional. And always, all her life till her death, I always looked to her as a person who really showed true Christian love to those that she contacted with. I grew up in a family of 6 boys and 2 girls. First, when I went to Carthage to pastor, one of the people in the congregation asked me about my family, and I said, well, Mom and Dad had 6 boys in a row, and then had 2 girls. And she said, you had what? I said, 6 boys. I says, wasn't Mom lucky? And she just rolled her eyes. But my family was very important to me. We lived on a farm, so we worked together. And so we 6 boys had to learn to get along together. And I think we did fairly well. My father was rather strict. He was a kind person, but we needed to obey him at all times. And I had times, a number of years of rebellion. Just didn't like that kind of push to make me do this and that and the other thing. And it wasn't until after I was married a number of years that I really had an experience with the Lord that changed my life. And it wasn't long after that, Betty and I talked about it, and we decided that I told her I'd like to go into voluntary service for a period of time. I did not have to serve my own time, but I just felt it was a good program and I wanted to be involved in it. So we volunteered at the mission office, and I told them I would go anywhere as they sent me, but I would not want to go to New England, and I would not want to work in a nursing home. But I'll go if you tell me to. I wanted to go west. You know where I went? I went to New England, and I worked in a nursing home part-time. I'm so thankful to the Lord for that experience. I learned to know these older men and older ladies, and just see the tremendous beauty in them in their lives and how they face life at that age. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me. We came back home, and got involved with the youth at Lavo congregation for a number of years and worked with them. And that was a very challenging task and very encouraging just to see all the energy that these kids had and the different things that they did. I recall the one year we had a retreat at the vendors right by the nursing home, and that night we just about got ate up by the bugs and mosquitoes. You cover your head under something, and then you get too hot, and then you take it off, and the mosquitoes there again. We didn't know what to do the next day, so at our home we had a woods and a stream, and we talked about it and we decided to change the whole location to our home. So we got rigged up and had the retreat in the woods. And afterwards, some of the neighbors in Martinsburg said that so they see all these young people coming in, and this was the time of, these rock festival time. And they see all these young kids coming in, and they said, boy, what are we in for? And I will say this for the young people, they went and we had activities, and in the evening, we went down in the woods. We'd gotten some lighting down there and got in the woods, and they sang songs throughout the whole evening. And then they left to go home that night. Different ones from Martinsburg come to me afterwards and said, boy, we didn't know what we were in for when you see all this. But she said, we love that singing. She said, that music came right up into town. And she said, when they left, there was no tires squealing, just quietly left. She said they were really impressed. I thought that spoke well for the youth of our churches. It was in 1986 I was ordained to go to Carthage, and I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later, but prior to that I worked with the Carthage congregation with Bible school for quite a number of years. We did a lot of canvassing and trying to get the message out about the Bible school, and we usually had a real large Bible school. We did a lot of transportation, like they said, you just chucked them in until they couldn't get in anymore. And I guess it wouldn't be legal now today, but back then you could do that and get away with it. For me to change from a congregation the size of Lowville to a small congregation of 25, 30 people was a big change. It was a big change to get acquainted with a lot of new people in the community, trying to get acquainted with them. You didn't play the Mennonite game there because it just didn't work. But it was a good lesson for me, and hopefully what I did there was a help to the people there. Just pray that it is.
My name is Dwayne Farney. I attend the Apostolic Christian Church here on 812. It was changed to the Apostolic Christian Church in 91, I believe, when we incorporated. It was formerly the Evangelical Baptist Church. So it's been good to share the childhood memories. It's probably all sparked our memories. It's sparked my thoughts here. I sit here with a thankful heart, what the Lord has done in my life. Took me back, maybe just speak a little bit how we was tied to the Mennonites. Our bishops in our cemetery, they're the Berklers that come from Europe. They were Mennonite bishops, and then there was a split there, and I don't know what year it was, but then our church joined the Samuel Freilich following. But we had Mennonite roots, so we're in this group, which I'm thankful. And as we've been told to think about our childhood, we can all go back in our childhood, can't we? And as I go back on mine, it was probably a little different growing up. I lived 6 months with my dad and 6 months with my mom. When I was with my dad, the church was involved. When I was with my mom, there was no church involved. And, we don't really have a choice when we come into this world what we're going to face, but always felt the Lord was with me. And I just want to use names. So it probably goes back in the late 50s. there was a God-fearing woman. Her name was Esther Lehman, Gilbert and Esther. And she came to our home, and she said, we have a 2-week Bible school over the church, Kirchnerville there. And so myself and my 3 siblings, we did that for quite a few years. She picked us up every morning. We had morning classes, I believe, and I think the afternoon classes I think we went home about noon or shortly after. And we did that for 2 weeks, and then Friday night I think there was a program. So I have to think about that. That had a bearing. We was taught Jesus, taught what he done, and you know that should be the center point of all our lives. And as time went on, and it brought back memory. I went to the Brewery Hill School for 6 years, and I went to school with some of you. Nate was in my graduating class, but there was a time in those first 6 years of that school. There was a lady from Pennsylvania that came. I believe her name was, she was a single woman, Christian. Miss Fix was her name. And she brought, we had religious instruction. I believe it was on a Friday afternoon, and we went to different homes. We went to Benny Yowzy's home. We went to Sally Mosier's home. And there was a few other ones, but that had an impact. I mean, we learned the books of the Bible. Somebody talked about that, learning. And but in those classes, which were, I believe, I'm not sure if they was every week or once a month, but anyway, we learned the books of the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament. That certainly had a bearing. And then, as time went on, I was blessed with a family, wonderful wife, 2 boys, two girls, and during that time, after the birth of our first girl, our daughter became very ill. And it looked like maybe she wasn't going to live. I was unconverted at that time, but I knew it was a calling of God. So I humbled myself and repented. But by the grace of God, was converted. God gave life to that girl. She's sitting here today with us. So I think all of us can say God has been good. God has been good in our lives. And I had to think about traveling and how some of you went to the Caribbean, and I've been to Haiti a few trips. I often think, one blood works in us all. No matter where we're born, Russia, China, India, the same blood works in us all. So we have one chief shepherd, and that's the bishop of our souls. So I'm thankful that we could, I think it's been a blessing to relate our childhood and what makes us and where we are today. And pray we can all draw closer to God and live out our vows to be promised to him for lifelong. Thank you.
Okay, some of you have covered the second part of this, which is good. It all integrates in our minds, I think. So we'll go back through, but if you covered everything you want to say, so the second part, and I talked with Evan about this again recently. What are we doing? And it's not 100% clear to either of us, perhaps, but how have we lived out? How did I live out then in my adult life the formation of faith that I experienced in my younger years? And perhaps how does that, since this is Legacy 500, looking back to Anabaptism, how does that connect with the history of Anabaptism that you have picked up? I never knew the word Anabaptist till I left the area and went to school, I think. It wasn't part of my vocabulary. Looking back, I think I absorbed an awful lot as a child and as a teenager. I absorbed what was being taught without using that language. And since then, I've learned a little bit about Anabaptist history and so on. And so we can work back down through the row again. If you don't want to use your time, I'm guessing there's questions from the audience that we'll go back, and have time for some question and answers. And so go ahead, Al.
Alrighty. I got a couple stories I'd like to share. I think it was around 2000 that the Mennonite MCUSA convention, I think that's what it's called, was held in St. Louis. And for years, or several times at Lavo Church, would try to send the youth group to this convention because there was a large youth participation there. And so this particular year, Amy and I were invited to ride with the youth out to this convention. It's the only convention I ever made. But I was impressed with what happened, and so that's what I'm going to share about. The youth raised money to go to that convention by cutting wood. And they cut enough wood to pay for their way out there and to be at the convention. I didn't think a lot about that until we got to the convention and found out what other youth groups were doing. Some of them were in the church budget, and they just got flown out there, and whatever, and they were part of the convention. I think one group put on a spaghetti supper, and they must have charged $150 a plate because that took care of it. The convention was held as a part of that complex was the stadium that the St. Louis Rams played in. They're now the Los Angeles Rams or whatever, but they were in St. Louis at that point. And you looked inside, and here's this enormous football field. I think it had a track around it, and then all the seating. And we did some calculation and told the young people, you cut enough wood to make a 4-foot height of wood 2/3 of the way around this stadium. That's what they did in order to get there. Now, we all stayed in hotels around there. And for some reason, I got talking with somebody who was a chaperone at the hotel where our youth group were staying. Let me back up a little bit. Our youth group got there by taking a school bus and driving from here out there. I see Kevin and Sue here. They were part of it, and also Tom and Brenda Hauser. Sue had just had surgery just not too far before that. I'm amazed, Sue, you survived, but you did well. This chaperone at the motel said, your youth group is a model group. What you were saying, Ed, reminded me of that type of thing. They don't give us any trouble. They're respectful, and they're behaving themselves. They participated in the youth activities out there. I know one of the things they did, I'm told, was that they went out into the community and helped clean a street or something. And the story I got, they were following some other youth groups who just busted on through, and they got to the end and into the refreshments. And our group was coming along, picking up dutifully the stuff they got there, and when they got to the other end, the refreshments were gone. But I was impressed with the fact that they had that type of work ethic, and rather than being paid whatever to go and do this, they put in the sweat equity. The other thing is, there were a whole bunch of adults that worked along with the young people cutting wood. And I always believed that one of the reasons these young people behaved themselves and also participated in what was going on and learning what they could is because they knew there were a bunch of lumberjacks back home they had to answer to. And, but anyway, I was impressed with how the young people acted there. Another story I'd like to share. There's a book written by Jeannie Yancey. Any of you seen this one? You know who Jeannie is? Danny Yancey is her husband. It's entitled "Faith in Full Color: A Tapestry of Anabaptist Stories." There's a story in here about Lowell Mennonite Church. I didn't know it when I bought the book. I bought it because I knew Jeannie and whatever. Back in 2001, I was involved with the hospice program in Lewis County. There was a family where the husband had pancreatic cancer and was dying. He was on hospice, and I was visiting them. One time, one visit, the wife said, "Could I speak to you outside personally?" So we stepped out on the porch, and she said, let me back up. I think they were a bit new to the community. I don't know if this was a camp maybe that they were staying at, and most of their family was somewhere else. But she said, "Would it be possible for us to have the funeral service at your church?" And I'm thinking, I need help to do a funeral service. And so I said, "Let me talk to some people and I'll get back to you." There were two people that I needed to talk to. One was Ken Erb. He was a music guy. I needed somebody to do music. And the other one was Anna Mae Rose, who was in charge of the kitchen and that type of thing so we could do a meal. So I talked to them and said, this is a situation. And what do you think? And both of them said, "We're willing to help. We're willing to do what we can." And so we had a funeral service there at the church. Many people did various things and didn't know this family from Adam. Just that here was a family that was in need. And at the meal, I was sitting with some of this lady's daughters. Her name was Flo. And they said, "We want you to introduce our mother to some of the ladies of this church because we want her to come here." And Flo became part of the congregation. Anna Mae had a way of taking somebody under her wing. The next thing I knew, poor Flo had more things to do than she knew what about. But she became a part of the congregation. Sometime later, she then moved to be with some of her daughters, and I've kind of lost track of her. 3 years later, there was a young person on hospice. I think the lady was 28 and passed away. The family was obviously distraught, didn't know what to do at that point, and they were among themselves, after she had actually died, trying to figure out what to do next and so on. The hospice nurse was sitting there, and finally she spoke up, and she said, "I know a church that's willing to help people out who have a death like this." And she gave the name of Lowell Mennonite Church. I'm not trying to brag. I was just thoroughly impressed that this lady somehow made that connection. And so we ended up doing that funeral at Lowell Mennonite Church. It was a memorable one. I've never been in anything like that before. This young lady was a motorcycle rider, and there were about 40 motorcycles parked in front of Lowell Mennonite Church for that funeral. And there's something, I guess it's a tradition, that when somebody like that dies, they have what's called a lone rider. Somebody probably rides that person's bike or whatever, following the hearse, but out in front. And then back quite a ways, you've got a whole bunch of other motorcycles coming, usually in 2s or 3s or whatever. So I was told to park out front, the hearse would go, then these cycles, and then I was to follow that. So I'm sitting there on the road, and all of a sudden they fire up 40 of these, what's the main motorcycle? What do they call Larry? Harleys, yeah. About 40 of these things fired up there, and I thought, oh, good Lord. Anyway, but it was interesting, turning to Dadville Corner and looking up there, there was the hearse turning the corner up by the Limekill Hill. The lone rider was behind them, and then there was a string of all these cycles behind that. And it was just really impressive. But, you know, that was a need that they had, that the congregation was willing to step out of the box and whatever and help. Yeah, I was kind of that. Some of that story is in here that Jeannie must have picked up, and saying that the Lowell Mennonite Church is continuing to do that, and many times don't know who the people are, but volunteers were stepping out to do that. I'm guessing other churches do that. I'm not trying to kind of put Lowellville on a pedestal or whatever, but I think, to me, that's an example of touching people when they're in need, and I think she entitled it Serving a Meal to Those Who Mourn. And I've not read any of the other stories in here, but I think they're all different stories of Anabaptism in Shula. Already.
One thing I thought of when Evan was saying that is about church convention, because in 2003, Elton and I went to Atlanta to the Mennonite convention there. It was wonderful. The singing is just beautiful. We were with Jim and Amy Devers. But one thing I brought away from that convention, the main speaker was Jimmy Carter, because it was in Atlanta. And I've never forgotten what Jimmy Carter said in his address to us. We're all Christians here, and you know the word Christian to me means little Christ.
It's amazing many times how other people help us in a time that we may struggle, we may have a weakness, we may be going through a difficult time. Silas passed away on the 26th of January, which was a Sunday afternoon. It was a difficult time for us as a family. Over 10 years ago, we had lost a son, and now we had lost a grandson. The Hispanic church rebounded in a marvelous way. One of the leaders of the Hispanic church called me on Monday morning to see if there'd be a possibility to get together with those that were interested from the Spanish church that could get together on Monday evening. And I told them, yes, we could arrange it. I could let people know if it was necessary. We ended up meeting at our house. There were 18 Hispanics that came to our house, and we had a beautiful service. The one thing that really stands out is that we all are created in the image of God. In the image of God created he them, male and female. And we have different needs. We speak different languages. We come from different countries. It wasn't our choice where we were born, who our parents were, what our family heritage is. But God reaches out many times to help us in times of need from people that we didn't expect. My prayer is that Linda and I can continue to be servants of God wherever He may call us, that we will be a stepping stone to others so that they may come to know Christ as their personal Savior as well. It's the best, it's the only hope that we can give them for tomorrow and for the day after. In the time that has passed since the 26th of January, I've talked with a lot of people that have lost a child in their family or someone they know, some family that they know. And many of them did not have that hope of where they would go if it would have been them. We need to share with others. We need difficult experiences in our lives so that we can share with other people that there is hope for tomorrow in knowing Jesus. And oftentimes we may struggle and we may say these things should not happen to Christians. But thank God for His strength and for being with us each day and for bringing people in our lives so that we can share the hope that Jesus gives us for tomorrow. And I thank God for my bringing up and also for the bringing up of Linda. And that through the years, we've had difficult times, but that God has always been faithful to us. And I pray that we will be faithful to others as He has been faithful to us. We never know the next turn in the road, what it might bring in our lives. But hopefully we can share the good news with others and that others will see what Jesus really brings to their lives.
I maybe did a little bit backwards, but I wanted to introduce the church so that would help you to understand where I come from. And the part of growing up, that's the only church I remember was Pine Grove. And around those people, I caught something there that would not go away throughout my life. To see the example of them. And Dad occasionally would take me, and I was pretty young. He usually spent one night a week up in the Pine Grove area. He'd go to different families. Once in a while, he would take me along with him if time permitted it. And if Mom would let him if I didn't get home too late. But anyway, a number of places we were to. I got introduced to introducing people to Jesus in a way that I hadn't heard before in other settings. The gentleness and the way he just connected with people and helped them to see Jesus in their life. And never did I ever hear him say anything about their physical situation, what their marital situation was, what they were doing with their life, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, whatever they were doing. He would introduce them to Jesus and let Jesus work in their lives to take care of this other stuff that was going on. And I caught a lot of that or listened, saw it happening. And Leon Martin also had a huge effect on me when I was growing up real young. He was pastor at the church. He grew up in a Mennonite community in Maryland and moved up here and married up here and moved here and was the first pastor at Pine Grove. And I can only assume how difficult that was for him. It was like a cross-cultural situation from what he grew up in. But he was very, very effective there, and very effective. And his oldest son had an issue with, he needed to be in a drier climate. And so they moved to Colorado then later. And then that's when my dad then was assigned the responsibility of pastor there at Pine Grove. So all of that culminated in when I was older, then went into voluntary service, we went to orientation in Elkhart, Indiana, and ahead of that I was assigned to go to La Junta, Colorado, is where I insisted or assumed we were headed. That's what they had told me. and got there, and a week or so before orientation started, something had happened at the unit, and they were going to close part of it rather than expand it. And so there's other options, and one of them was the place where Ed Rogie was as unit leader. And so well, that sounded okay. I guess I'd go there. I knew Ed and Betty. And so that went on for about a day. And then a young guy pulled me aside one day, and he said, "Are you going to New Hampshire, Claremont?" And I said, "Well, that's what they're saying." He said, "Would you mind telling them you'd rather not go there?" She said, "I got a girlfriend there, and I'd really like to go there." So I said, "Okay, it's fine with me." I said, "It didn't matter to me that much." So there was a unit forming in Manaway, Ohio, that was a home for severely mentally and physically handicapped children. And so there was a new unit going there. So there was an elderly couple from Pennsylvania and a young lady from Iowa and myself, and went there. And that's obviously where I met Ruth, and she was a nurse there at the home for these children. And I didn't pay much attention to her for 5 years or so that I was out there. I got thinking one day, the way she takes care of the children, she'd make somebody a really good wife. So that started, 50-some years ago as to where we are now. But the calling for ministry, I think, I remember from 12, 13 years old, I think I knew at that point already that at some point that was going to happen. I didn't know when or how or whatever. But I remember when I proposed to her, I told her, I said, "I have this sense of calling. I want you to know that before you say yes or no." And so she agreed to that, and we ended up here, obviously. But she told me later, I'm not sure, maybe it was after we were married even, when she was a little girl, she would play cutout. They cut little, I remember my sisters doing that, cutting out things out of a magazine, playing dolls. Or they cut out these little figures and have them all in families and all that stuff. And us boys loved to open the door real quick, and stuff would just fly all over the place. They'd have to put the families all back together again. But she said when she was a little girl, she cut those out, and she was playing with her friends, and she was always going to marry a minister's son from New York. She said, "I had no idea where New York was or any of that, but that was her family." So that's 50-some years ago, and it's still working. So to her coming up here, and to the experiences I had with growing up in that kind of a context, and then being called later then to serve at Pine Grove is the highlight of my life. Not one of them, it is the highlight. And to see the churching develop now into Living Hope, and what God is doing there in that community has been a huge blessing to me. So thank you.
I don't know if you do this or not, but after an activity or a period of time, sometimes I look back and wonder how successful I was in that particular activity. And I don't know about that poor one. Was it the guy that wanted to come up there?
I don't remember.
But anyway, we ended up at the end of the year, we had 2 couples. They ended up getting married, so I thought that was pretty good success. But you do look back on that. And as I look back on the time at the Carthage area, how different it was from what I had experienced before that. Most of our work took place in some people's homes, very little in the church itself. We did Bible studies in homes, we did visitations in homes, and that's where we centered our activities, is on people's homes. That's where people are comfortable in their home, and so that's what we did. And sometimes, and a lot of elderly people. And sometimes we'd have people make commitments at a real old age, never get to come to the church, pass away before they could do that because they were in ill health. And it didn't make more people in our church, but I believe it did increase more people in heaven, and that's the ultimate goal that we should have. So it was a change for us, both of us, but it was a good experience for us to be able to see people who didn't know anything about the gospel come to faith. One illustration that we been having in one home, what we call cottage meetings and Bible studies, and something was said about the person in that home later on. It said, I don't think that they were Christians, that they had gotten cancer, come down with cancer. And she said, I'm not sure how far advanced the cancer is. And you know, it's something about that hit me. And when I got on the way home, I told Betty, I said, before the week's over, we're going back to that home and visit that lady. So we did, sat down with her, and she was very open and talked about commitment, forgiving the sins, and all that went into the making a commitment to the Lord. And as she sat there just listening, and I said, after a while, I said to her, have you ever done that? She says, no, but she said, sometimes I thought sometimes I should. And I said, would you like to? And she said, yes. And I thought, this is too easy. So I went through the whole routine again, tried to explain it all to her, and she just sat there looking at me. And I says, is that what you'd like to do? She said, yes, very emphatically. She made a commitment, and it was like maybe 3 weeks later, I was at a board meeting in Ohio, and I got a call from Earl, and Earl says she passed away. Just before we left to go to Ohio, I talked with her, and I asked her how she felt, that she was prepared, and she said, absolutely. She had a very clear commitment. And I told Betty, it's like somehow we sort of stole that person for the Lord from Satan, you know, and so that was the kind of experiences that we've had in our setting in that area. One thing, we should pray for each other, and regardless of what our work is, and each person has those contacts with different people, and we should uphold each other in prayer that we can convey God's love to those people that we come in contact with.
Support that thought. Yeah. Oh, I just sparked a couple thoughts, maybe, especially when Lawrence brought the losses in his family. Talked to a man, it's been a few years ago. He lost a son, I believe he was about 6 years old. Lost in the field. And I knew that man, relationship with him. He was a sawmiller, like I am. And I said, I want to go see him. So went there. In fact, I made 2 attempts. The first time, I don't think they were at the home. So the second attempt, they was there. And I believe it was after the funeral. So, you know, we just never know what to say to someone. I think our presence there says a lot. So I went to the man, and, you know, it was just something so simple, but yet it was just awakened me. We talked a little bit, and I said, well, I just pray you can reach out to God. God knows what you're going through. And the man looked at me, and he said, yeah, he lost a son too. That was, you know, just so simple, but yet so how true. And then I think you kind of made a norm about where we are today and what we're doing. Well, we need to stay close to the Bible. We need to read the Word. I do anyway. We need to pray daily, talk to God, give Him thanks for what we have. We are a blessed people, loved ones. You know, the first trip I made to Haiti, which goes back to 2005, I came home and I thank God for a glass of water that you could drink. And those people just don't have what we have now. I mean, for those people to go through the grocery store and go down the aisles, it would be heaven to them. When you don't have enough to eat, none of us, I believe, realize what that is. So we're thankful for what we have.
We did pretty good for a group of preachers. And Geneva was very concise. Everybody, you know, you were all quite concise. So we stayed in the time limit. Can we take a couple more minutes if there's any pressing questions you have for someone here? We can run over a minute or two, yeah. Any questions on your mind? Personally? And just a concluding comment. We look back to our history not to indulge in the nostalgia of what's past or in some over-the-rainbow dream of the future, but to know something of who and why we are in order to live in the present and in the presence of the one who is beyond history, yet shares all of our history, and whose future kingdom is among us now. When we learn to know this, we are indeed leaves that are part of a tree. Bernadine, would you like to close?
Well, thank you very much, panel, for sharing for us. It's not very often that we get together like this, that we can hear the stories of how our various churches, what it was like in the early days and up to the current time. So we really appreciate your willingness to share this story. And I believe it will be recorded, and so you can review that later if you want. We are going to lift an offering, and the proceeds of that will go, I believe, for the ongoing expenses of running the Heritage Farm. So we'll be ready to lift the offering. Thank you so much for your willingness to contribute monetarily to our program at the Heritage Farm. And thank you again for coming today. I really appreciate it. And I know it's been a good service and interesting time for us to hear the stories that we don't often get together like this, do we, to hear these stories, and that's good. Okay, I've asked Nate Zare to come to have a closing prayer, so let's stand, please.
Father, for this day and for this meeting and for this special time together, we thank you. Thank you for what each one represents here under your kingdom. Thank you for your leadership, for your direction and your guidance in each of our churches. I pray that you would continue to help us to understand who you are in a deeper and more profound way, and that we would live and work and communicate in that presence. Just bless this organization. Thank you for their witness to the community and to the area. And just help us again to deeper understand who you are and what you want for each of us in our lives and how you want to share our lives with those around us. Just bless that process as we go from here. For we pray in your name. Amen.